Well, hello everyone. It's time to talk about a topic that, when we cover it in class, sometimes is rather difficult for some students, and sometimes it's not. And that is the topic of divorce. And the way I talk about this in class is it is not a topic that I cover from the perspective of the parents. Where one parent doesn't like the other parent, or for whatever reason. I cover it from the vantage point of the child. Okay, the children who are, have parents who are going through a divorce. I have actually asked in class many times those kids, or excuse me, those college students who at one time, were kids younger, and if their parents divorced. And some don't want to talk about it. Others do. And, I'll ask questions such as how old were you? How did you find out? What was your reaction? Were you shocked? Were you relieved? The fighting had stopped. Did you ever think it was your fault? Some kids say no. A few say at the time I thought I did something wrong when I was very, very young. So it's a difficult topic, but it's one that has to be addressed. In fact, when I've had friends that tell me they're getting a divorce, I will a lot of times ask, how are the kids? And sometimes they'll turn around and look at you like, well, yeah, the kids are fine, but let me tell you about myself. And my attitude is, I'm really not that concerned about you and your spouse. It's the kids who didn't ask for this. I want to know how they're doing. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about divorce, and let's talk about what I would call the perspectives of divorce. Okay? What I'm referring to here is how children respond to this. Okay? How children deal with this, the psychological and emotional reactions of finding out that mom and dad are divorcing, or the parents are divorcing, things like that. The first is what we call the divorce stress adjustment theory. What a lot of parents don't realize is that when they go through a divorce, okay, in the minds of a child, it's not a single event. Okay, it's more of a process. A parent may uh, go with the lawyer or what have you to the courthouse on a given day. The day has finally come. We fill out the paperwork before the judge. The marriage results in a divorce. Okay, it's over. In the mindset of the parent, it's over. Not necessarily in the mind of the child. It's more of a process. And this process, it can cause family problems between children and their divorcing parents. It really can. Just because yesterday or last week you went through the court proceedings doesn't mean it's over in terms of the mindset of the children. Stress levels in children sometimes actually increase after the day of the divorce. Okay, for a number of possible reasons. That parent isn't there anymore, you don't have their support anymore, things of that sort. The uncertainty of the future, stress levels can increase. It is worth noting that sometimes stress levels decrease in children because maybe the yelling and the screaming have stopped. Maybe they're away from a parent who wasn't the best of parents. And that sort of leads me to the second possible perspective of how divorce is handled. This is what is called the selection model divorce. This model basically says that psychological and behavioral problems, okay, seen in children after divorce really aren't the result of the divorce itself. Okay. Psychological and behavioral problems seen in children after divorce is not due to the event, but instead due to the parent they end up with. Okay. The psychological problems of the parent. Maybe mom or dad suffers from a bipolar disorder. Okay. And the child's behavior is more a result of being around an ill parent than to the divorce. So problems after the divorce is due more to who you are selected to be with and the issues you have to deal with from them. Okay. Sometimes it's not just a single event, and the problems that occur is because it's a process, it's ongoing. So those are the two. As far as some possible outcomes associated with divorce, be aware of this. Overall, the hardest time for children in dealing with a divorce is usually the first 24 to 48 months. Okay, so don't misunderstand what that says. It doesn't mean that they're fine, and then after 2 years, they're not going to be fine. The hardest time actually can be the first year up to 4 years. All right, first 24 to 48 months, as they're trying to adjust and figure out all the things that are going on. And we'll talk about some of the other outcomes here. Now, it's worth noting that some children can be surprisingly resilient during this time. Um, and quite honestly, they can hold up better psychologically than their parents. There have been times that children sort of go back to the way they were doing things before, playing with their friends, hanging out with others, and then you've got a mom or a dad that is lost because, in spite of all the fighting and the arguing, they don't know what to do. The parent does, and so the child ends up being uh, more resilient than parents, and that can happen. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that children can have problems for extended difficulties, different periods of time. And unfortunately, sometimes it's longer than, say, 48 months or 4 years. As far as the possible outcomes associated with divorce, this gets into a laundry list of things, but it really needs to be covered. There are what we call behavioral outcomes. Okay? And what we're talking about here is possible responses you could see from the children. Studies have found that children from divorce homes typically show more what we call acting out behavior than children from homes where the parents are still married. And by acting out behavior, I mean disobedience, aggression, juvenile problems, antisocial behavior, things of that sort. Okay, we see more of that from children whose parents have divorced than from children whose parents have not divorced. So that is a possible issue as well. We also see more relationship problems. Children of divorced families have a higher probability of having problems with relationships when they're adults. And studies have actually found there is a higher rate of teenage pregnancy in children who are come from homes where mom and dad have divorced versus homes where mom and dad haven't. And some of that is, teens reaching out for the love and the support, the affection of others. They become intimate, they become sexual, and pregnancy can result. Okay. In terms of psychological outcomes, we see a very fascinating thing that can sometimes happen to kids, and it's what is called parentification. Parentification, how can I put this? Children of divorced parents sometimes feel that they have to grow up faster, and they have to take on parent type responsibilities. Okay? Now, to be fair, mild to moderate levels of parentification can be beneficial. Children learn how to, clean the house, how to run the washer and the dryer, how to turn around and, take dinner out of the refrigerator and preheat the oven and put it in at 4:30 because they've come home and mom is going to be home at 5:30 or dad's going to be home at 5:30, whichever the case may be. Mild to moderate levels of parentification can be helpful. Intense levels are too much for children, all right? And they can be damaging. They really can. Now, parentification takes on two types. The first is what we call instrumental parentification. And that includes a lot of what I was just talking about, actual parenting responsibilities, such as housework and things of that sort. It's the child and the parents. The other parent is not in the picture anymore. And so now I need your help around the house. And this can be a good thing if it's mild to moderate. If a small child is left to do things that are beyond their abilities, or asking too much of a child who's only in second or third or fourth grade or fifth grade, and that can be hard. And then there is what we call emotional parentification. Emotional and emotional parentification includes comforting and expressing emotional support. Okay, not only for their siblings but for their parents. I know of one particular example of a mother who, after divorce, she sort of fell into the depths of depression. And there were afternoons, I was told this by a student, that she would just cry, lay on the couch and just cry. And here you have a little girl who's about 11 years old, who's trying to be the support structure for the parent. It's okay, and things like that. And honestly, that can be too much to ask of a 10-year-old or 11-year-old and stuff like that. It is worth noting that if you have to offer emotional support, the research says that girls, small girls, are better at doing this for their mother or father than boys. Boys do struggle a little bit with offering emotional support to mothers and fathers and things like that. I'm not trying to slam boys, okay, but that is what our research tends to find in that regard. Mhm. Now, in terms of some other issues and things like that, other psychological outcomes, I guess I mean to say, so this is still under the psychological category. There are higher rates of receiving psychological treatment for children who come from divorced families than other children. There are higher levels of short term depression, especially immediately after the divorce. All right, than you would see in children whose parents are not divorced. Self esteem suffers when parents divorce. Um, and to be quite honest, some of these psychological problems don't even appear until after adolescence. They really don't. When teens try to form their own relationships, this is what we call the sleeper effect of divorce. Right? The sleeper effect of divorce, where we see in later times, maybe in your 20s or 30s, the divorce happened when you were 13 or 14 between your parents. And now, you're 29 years old, and, you've been married and divorced two times, and you're starting your third marriage and you're 29. You got married when you were 16, you got married again when you were, 20, and now you're getting married again when you're 28 or 29, and it's just not working. The problems here in your late 20s is really due to what happened, years earlier. That's why we call it a sleeper effect. As far as academic outcomes, a lot of children who are from divorced families have a higher high school dropout rate. They attend college less and have higher or have more difficulties holding down a job than children who come from homes where mom and dad are not divorced. So that's some other academic things. For what it's worth, there are some positives, and they are worth noting. Okay, there are some positive outcomes for children with divorce, and one of them I sort of already mentioned, and that is that with some children, they're relieved that the fighting is over and their stress level drops. Mom and dad are no longer together. They're no longer fighting. They're no longer yelling and screaming at each other. Um, and so they're relieved of the stress. The fighting is done. And like I said, some children benefit from parentification. It teaches a child responsibility. They're not just hearing the topic, they're living it. And that's a positive. And sometimes children find themselves in a situation where, for one weekend they're with one parent, and then maybe the other weekend they're with the other parent. And sometimes you see a situation where now that you're spending every other weekend, let's say with dad, you're getting more time spent, one-on-one time spent with you. Um, you know, the dad is spending more time now than they did when they were married. All right. So, the parents focus on them more now than they ever did before in that regard. All right. And then I'd say one last final positive outcome worth noting here is that children develop emotionally and psychologically better when they're away from a parent that has mental illness problems, drug dependent, psychologically unstable. They're not around them anymore. So that definitely can be a positive. So there are some positives to be noted here. I think this next part is probably one of the most important aspects of divorce, and it's something that you need to keep in mind if you and your spouse are feeling that divorce is imminent and you have children in play. These are what I call minimizing the effects of divorce. Now, there can be a long laundry list of things, but these are some of the things that researchers say are the most important if you and your spouse are going to get a divorce. Okay. Number one, it's time to sit down with your child, you and your spouse. All right. I can only say, deal with it, suck it up, sit down with the child, and just make sure they understand the following. Number one, they are not the cause of this divorce. Okay. That may sound silly, but some children will actually quietly think to themselves they did something to cause it. They may not always come forward and say it, but our research has found that children have thought that before. So it's wise to sit down with your child and just point out to them that it's not their fault. They did not cause this. Also, that they are still loved. I think small children, even children in middle school and possibly junior high age, will sometimes wonder if that is the case. All right, and that they are still loved by both parents. It's not their fault. All right. Also, not to hold on to the belief that they're going to get back together. That this is permanent. This divorce is permanent. We're going our separate ways. We're not going to get back together. Because what will happen is that some children will quietly hold on to the belief that mom and dad are going to someday get back together and we'll all be happy again. And a lot of times that doesn't occur. Quite a few times that doesn't occur. So it's a long, painful process coming to the realization that it's not happening. So making it clear to a child up front that it's not going to occur is a very important thing. Now, yes, I know on rare occasions parents do get back together, and then sometimes they separate a second time. And that's just all the more painful on a child because it gives them false hope and can be very damaging. And then finally, structure. Structure, structure, structure. If you and your spouse are divorcing, okay, it is very important that your child have a very structured setup. They get up around the same time every day for school, they go off to school, they get picked up, they go through the same routine. Structure in children gives a sense of predictableness and it lessens the stress. Okay. When things are constantly unpredictable, they tend to distress even more, and that's obviously not a good thing. So, we don't want to go that route in that regard. Okay. Okay. I also mentioned some other topics, and so let me go ahead and talk about these right now. First of all, the never marrieds. There are those individuals that turn around and may have a child or children, and they never do get married. All right. Um, what studies find is this: the psychological, academic, and behavioral outcomes for children who grow up with one parent who never marries is surprisingly similar to those kids in divorce settings. Now, I'm just quoting the research. Okay. So, in that regard, it really truly is. However, with the absence of any father figure, okay, it can be even greater, especially to boys. It's the way we as humans are designed. It's not that moms cannot be good parents. Of course they can be good parents. I will never say otherwise. But boys especially benefit from the presence of a father figure. All right? And if that's not available, if that's not there, okay, that can be a big, big issue with them. So the absence of any father figure, the damage can be far greater. All right. Those parents who are divorced as opposed to never married, and you get to see dad every other weekend or something like that, they actually do better than not having a dad in the picture in that regard. Okay. Step parents, studies show that when, and I'm just going to go with the traditional things here, that when moms remarry, it's mom who typically ends up with the kids. All right. When moms have the kids, it's just them and the kids, mom and the kids. The financial situation isn't always the best. Maybe mom is a little bit more lenient on the rules. Not always. But studies show that when moms remarry, financial situations, I say, usually improve. Okay. They usually improve. And boys sometimes fare better in school and do better with a fatherly figure present. Not always, it depends on if the stepdad and mom are, making time strictly for themselves or making time for the kids. All right. There are also some shortcomings to being a step parent or having a stepdad, let's say, or dare I say, even a stepmom. Some families suffer since now you have your let's say mom, okay, giving a lot of her time to her new spouse, to her new husband, and vice versa, okay, instead of the children. Uh, Financial situations can sometimes become complicated. Uh, you find yourself in a situation where mom is spending time with stepdad, and they're spending all the money on themselves, so it doesn't always help out. Um, and then you also have sometimes stepchildren. So it's sort of an instant family. Suddenly you have siblings, brothers and sisters that you didn't have before. So we all have to sort of share this time together. And what's real fascinating is if mom and dad, okay, step parents have a child themselves. Okay, if another child is born to these newlyweds, then what research has shown us is how they really focus on that child that they had together. Okay, and then the children brought into the marriage on both sides sometimes feel neglected, and that can be a problem. um, Finally, there are times that, when say for example, you're with your mom and she remarries. Now there are new rules. Now the dad says you got to be in bed by 8 o'clock or 8:30 to a child, and mom used to always let them stay up till 9, 9:30, 10. And you look to mom for guidance. Hey, I don't want to do this. And there are times that moms will turn around and say, well, you heard your father, get to bed. And that can happen too. So new rules sometimes appear that children don't necessarily like. And then finally, there's adoptive children who are adopted. And all I can really say about this is studies show that children tend to fare far better with adoptive parents than being in an institution. Okay. I was adopted, and I didn't spend a lot of time in an institution per se, but growing up in, some people call it an orphanage, it can be more of a challenge than having adoptive parents. So uh, in that regard, uh, adopted children tend to fare much better than those that stay in an institution. All right, folks, that's an awful lot of material, I will grant you, but definitely important stuff. Take care.